Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Don Sean. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. In late September, the US State Department released a report claiming that China is investing billions of dollars in disseminating false information globally, which poses a risk to the rapid decline of freedom of speech worldwide. In reality, the budget allocated by the Chinese government for these propaganda efforts, or as described by the US State Department, the funds used to influence on authoritarian society far exceed the mere tens of billions of dollars. Regarding the impact of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda, which the US government claims is causing a significant reduction in global freedom of speech, there is likely some influence, but its extent varies depending on the country. Countries with mature freedom-loving press systems tend to be more immune to the effects of the CCP's propaganda efforts. However, in many nations where democracy is still evolving or where democracy itself is of lower quality, it becomes difficult to predict the extent of the impact. All governments inherently lean towards controlling the freedom of information. Among all forms of freedom, the freedom of information takes precedence. The inequality of information is the most profound form of inequality, as seen in daily life where some individuals amass wealth by capitalizing on information disparities, including doctors, lawyers, financial advisors, investors, and insider traders. Thus, information inequality stands as the most pervasive form of global inequality. Any country, any government experiences the impulse to limit the speech of its ordinary citizens, aiming to enforce policies without obstruction. Even well-intentioned leaders focused on the welfare of the populace are not immune to this drive. It's an inescapable aspect of wielding power. Whether this urge can be restrained depends on the country's internal system, its cultural disposition, and its capacity to resist such impulse, factors closely tied to the nation's unique circumstances. In many countries, even those with established democratic systems, these impulses are challenging to suppress due to an underlying cultural inertia. The Chinese Communist Party's expansion of nationwide surveillance and speech control systems often targets countries with relatively weak democratic institutions, lacking the mechanism to counter autocratic or authoritarian rule and to resist the allure of information monopolies. Consequently, such nations are highly susceptible to falling into the CCP's influence and traps. I have no worries about the free and democratic nations because those that truly embody these principles have already navigated this phase of history. Over years of operation, they have established effective mechanisms. While it's true that many media outlets in the United States exhibit political biases, as Americans, we enjoy the freedom to select our news sources, whether you prefer the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, in an environment where information is generally well balanced. The Chinese Communist Party's propaganda finds it challenging to exert influence. Therefore, I hold no concerns for free and democratic countries. The CCP's propaganda can be influential in less developed nations and countries with subpar democratic systems, as there are the places where CCP exports its digital authoritarianism. However, in regions like Europe, the United States, and Japan, the impact of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda is quite limited. Now let's delve into where the funding for the CCP's propaganda is allocated. It can be divided into four primary areas. The first category comprises the Chinese Communist Party's own mouthpiece media, such as the English language China Daily. The primary source of funding for this newspaper comes from the Beijing government, with an annual allocation of at least 300 million yuan. However, China Daily has a limited readership. It is mainly distributed in Chinese embassies and consulates worldwide, as well as on international flights operated by Chinese civil aviation. This limits its overall impact. In Chinese supermarkets in overseas Chinese communities, you may find copies of China Daily, but it has relatively few readers abroad and lacks robust commercial marketing channels. Even in areas like Flushing, New York, which have substantial Chinese population, the newspaper, due to its English language content, struggles to gain readership since Chinese individuals typically prefer Chinese language publications. Therefore, the money the CCP spends on outlets like China Daily is essentially wasted. The second category involves the squandering of funds on deceptive media outlets targeting overseas Chinese communities. Allow me to share an illustrative anecdote without disclosing specific individuals. A Chinese national residing in Japan established a media outlet operating with just one assistant, essentially functioning as a small-scale operation. Despite its modest size, the media outlet adopted a grandiose name resembling a communication agency or something of that sort. After initiating this media venture, the individual returned to China, presenting himself as the proprietor of a prominent Chinese-language media company in Japan. He portrayed himself as an influential figure within Japan's Chinese community, claiming to have a substantial readership and positioned his media as a lifestyle guide. As a result, he received various funds from the Chinese government. However, what impact did this media outlet have in Japan? It held no sway within mainstream Japanese society or among the Japanese populace. Its reach within Japan's Chinese community was marginal at best. Consequently, the funds allocated by the CCP for such outlets were essentially wasted, or one could argue they were acquired through deception. The third category pertains to the acquisition of pre-existing genuine overseas Chinese language media outlets. Once acquired, these outlets commence publishing contents favorable to the Chinese Communist Party, effectively becoming part of the propaganda system, with a primary focus on the overseas Chinese community. Does it yield results? Yes, to some extent. A significant number of overseas Chinese have limited integration with their host country's culture and continue to rely on Chinese language media for their information and the perception of the world. The CCP's propaganda can influence this particular group of Chinese expatriates. However, these overseas Chinese share a common characteristic. They have little to no influence on the broader political landscape of their host countries. This is primarily due to factors like limited English proficiency, lack of participation in local elections, and some not holding U.S. citizenship or voting rights. Consequently, the efforts of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda cannot impact the political dynamics of their host countries. The fourth category pertains to the allocation of funds for internet and social media platforms. During Hu Jintao's tenure, the CCP's propaganda primarily focused on traditional media. However, since Xi Jinping assumed office, a substantial portion of propaganda funding has shifted to the internet, where cognitive battles are waged. Despite this increased investment in online platforms, the results have in reality been less effective compared to traditional media. Traditional media, at the very least, is a tangible form of media. However, on social media platforms, the brainwashing content of propaganda quickly constructs a closed ecosystem for you, facilitated by the platform's recommendation algorithms and the inherent characteristics of artificial intelligence. Ordinary people who have no interest in the CCP's propaganda content are unable to access this circle, and accounts within the propaganda sphere also face difficulties in breaking out, effectively enforcing their own beliefs. So, what's the solution? Later on, the CCP's Central Propaganda Department adopted a strategy involving a social media matrix, which includes the operation and management of multiple accounts. The Chinese Communist Party's online army operating abroad creates multiple individual accounts on various platforms, all personalized to suit each platform's unique characteristics. These accounts share diverse content ranging from pet photos and entertaining videos to jokes, travel, food, and educational material. Gradually, each account builds a following akin to the Chinese saying, "Raise an army for 1,000 days, use it for a moment." When the need arises for a cognitive battle, these accounts join forces, cross-promoting, reposting, and expanding their collective influence. But there is a risk as well. Let's consider a concrete example. China Central Television organized a group of individuals to establish their matrix on foreign social media platforms. Normally, the accounts in this matrix steer clear of politics and steer clear of association with the Chinese Communist Party. Instead, they focus on daily life content, following the philosophy of quietly nurturing, gently influencing. Unbeknownst to the audience, they subtly influence their perceptions. However, one day, the CCP issued a strict command, likely for an event related to Xi Jinping that required global attention. Given Xi Jinping's concern for his image, the propaganda machine was set in motion. It was a classic example of raising an army for 1,000 days to use it for a moment. All the accounts needed to collaborate, sharing and promoting the same message. In that moment, the person overseeing CCTV's matrix faced challenges. Cultivating these social media accounts wasn't a simple task. Attracting tens of thousands of followers wasn't straightforward either. When they shared this overtly political message, their identities were revealed and the social media platforms labeled them. Consequently, many followers departed. A significant portion of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda funds also went into this effort. It's true that the CCP has invested a considerable amount of money in its propaganda efforts, broadly speaking. But can it genuinely manipulate the entire landscape of public opinion in the free worlds? That's highly unlikely. Regardless of how well these propaganda contents are camouflaged, they often don't withstand close scrutiny and are swiftly exposed by the international community. The primary impact of the CCP's propaganda is on overseas Chinese who struggle to assimilate into their local societies, including many illegal immigrants and those who arrived in the United States through irregular means. While there are a few political dissidents among them, they represent a small minority. The majority of these individuals come to developed countries for work and financial opportunities, making them more susceptible to Chinese Communist Party influence. However, they have limited to no influence on the mainstream society of their host countries. The CCP's cognitive warfare and speech suppression are most effective when it's not the soft propaganda. What truly works is blatant intimidation relying on brute force and straightforward tactics. This is most evident in the context of Taiwan issue, where it involves suppressing expressions of Taiwan's independence. Outside of Chinese population, the global community generally displays little interest in the territorial dispute between the CCP and Taiwan. Beijing claims that Taiwan is an integral part of China, whereas Taiwan identifies itself as the Republic of China, an independent sovereign nation. This issue largely remains irrelevant to most of the world's population. However, under the CCP's heavy-handed and coercive tactics, the perception of this matter becomes distorted. For example, multinational corporations conducting business in China are compelled to acknowledge that Taiwan is a part of the CCP's China and may not categorize Taiwan as an independent country. Similarly, any organization seeking United Nations registration must recognize Taiwan as part of the CCP's China. Failing to do so may lead to the CCP to employ its position as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to obstruct your UN registration, among other measures. Among overseas Chinese, the majority tend to support the notion that Taiwan is a part of the People's Republic of China. This perspective is shaped not only by the CCP's influence, but also by a sense of pan-Chinese nationalism. Most Chinese abroad still hold aspirations for a unified and a greater China. The Chinese Communist Party has been remarkably effective in molding the opinions of Chinese expatriates on this issue, resulting in a skewed consensus within overseas Chinese communities. This consensus can, in turn, exert influence on the host country's societies, representing the CCP's most prominent sphere of influence abroad. However, over the past few years, due to the Chinese Communist Party's escalating confrontations with the global mainstream and the international community's exposure to events such as the COVID-19 pandemic originating in Wuhan, China, the CCP's role in the Ukraine conflict, and its approach to the Israel-Hamas conflict, the CCP's popularity among free society populations has significantly waned. Consequently, this has severely undermined the effectiveness of the CCP's and its propaganda campaigns and investments in soft power. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly. Until then, be well.